everyone. I'm doing this. It crossed my mind to do this anyway, but one or two people have asked me recently, as well as over the years, about tyre pressures. Now, could be a tricky, explosive subject, this one. I'll try and be careful about it and state my case and my opinions and my preferences, as well as I'm going to display what was said in some manuals back in the day, which I think adjustments have to be made in more recent times to what the old manuals used to tell us to use tyre pressure wise on motorbikes. And I've got here's one of the manuals I'll be sharing. It's for Triumph Twins, the pre-unit ones, 1945 to 1955, and we've got the obviously the Speed Twin, the Thunderbird, we've got the T100, the T110 and the TR5. They're all covered in this Triumph manual, and I'll hold the page up to the camera so that maybe anyone watching might be able to sort of pause the video and see the information there in a table on that page. But back in the day, Triumph were recommending tyre pressures ranging anywhere between 16 psi to 21 psi, and both of those figures actually, they are for the TR5, which would have had the knobbly tyres on it, and 16 psi for the rear, 21 for the front. The T100 swinging arm was 17 in the front, 19 rear, and the let's see, the 5T, 6T and T110 front was 18 psi, rear 19 psi, and it actually gets a little more interesting than that when we get the dreaded Royal Enfield Redditch manual. Remember this one? The one that tells you to put oil in your gearboxes, ladies and gentlemen? Yeah, I didn't make that one. Anyway, we'll start another fight with tyre pressures, shall we? This one actually says, and this is quite interesting, this one, the recommended pressures for the rear tyre, this is on your Royal Enfield Bullet, it doesn't state 350 or 500, so let's assume both, shall we? 16 pounds per square inch for wheel loads not exceeding 280 pounds. Then we've got 18 pounds per square inch for loads up to 320 pounds, 20 pounds per square inch for loads up to 350 pounds, 24 pounds per square inch for loads up to 400 pounds, getting heavy now. 28 pounds per square inch up to 450 pounds, and 32 pounds per square inch for up to 500 pounds. 500 pounds! That's knocking on the door of quarter of a ton. Just goes to show they had faith, Royal Enfield, in what their machines were capable of and what they could carry. Anyway, both of these manuals are probably from the early to late 50s, and it puts me in mind of a Panther 650 motorbike that I worked on, which had been left in a shed for over 40 years, and I had it here. There is actually some video footage of a couple of Panther 650s on my channel, and both of those had been dormant for a long time, actually, the pair of them. But I remember rebuilding the wheels for one of them and obviously fitting new tyres, and the Dunlop K70 tyres that I removed from one of those Panthers, they were about 3 times as heavy as the modern Dunlop K70 equivalents which were bought and I fitted, and the sidewalls were probably 2 or 3 times as thick. Tyres were really heavy and hard, and I'm sure that those tyres would have probably stayed up and kept their shape with a little more than 10 pound per square inch of air in them, but the new ones needed well over 20 to sort of take up their intended shape under the weight of the motorcycle with someone sat on it. And I've got to say, I would have probably inflated those tyres to the very high 20s probably, and certainly wouldn't have been, I don't know what the Panther manuals would have stated, but I would imagine that they would have been probably similar figures to the Triumph and the Royal Enfield ones there. And I certainly wouldn't have wanted to have 16 or 18 psi in those K70s under that heavy motorbike. And this is where we go into sort of personal preferences a bit, and you've got to be careful, because I'm not trying to tell anybody what pressures they should use in their tyres on their bikes, but I do get asked from time to time, so I'll be straight up and let's rattle off some of my bikes that I've currently got on the road. I've got, starting with one that's not actually on the road at the moment this year, because I've got a limited number of bikes I can insure on my policy, and I tend to rotate them a bit. But I've got an Indian built Royal Enfield 350, which has got obviously 19-inch wheels front and rear. I've got a 500 twin, that's a Honda CB500T from the mid to late 70s. That's got an 18-inch rear, 19-inch front. I've got a BSA Thunderbolt, which has got 18-inch on the rear, 19 on the front. And my Triumph Trident, now that has actually got an 18-inch wheel on the rear. It should have had a 19. I've still got the original 19, but years ago I put a wider 18 on it just to get more tyre choice, and it was a more sort of contemporary thing to do. So we've got an 18 and a 19 on that. And the tyres I use range from a pair of K70s that I've got on the A65. I've got a pair of Dunlop TT100s on the Honda CB500T. I've got a pair of Avon Road Rider Mark IIs on the Trident, and if I remember, it's a while since I've seen it, I think the old 350 Indian Bullet, I've got an original style Avon Roadrunner on the rear of that, and I think I've got an Avon Speedmaster on the front of it. So we've got a mixed bag of tyres there, but on all those bikes, and they're all similar sort of, not engine capacity, but physical sizes, similar physical sizes, and there's not a hell of a lot of difference in weight. Obviously the Trident is a good bit heavier than the 350 Bullet, but it's not gargantuan by today's standards, and I class all of them myself as sort of middleweight bikes for their sheer physical weight and the wheel sizes, the tyres they take, so on. And all those bikes, any one of those where I'm checking the tyre pressures and whether I'm going to ride them with just myself on board or occasionally my wife might jump on the back, I usually aim for 28 psi in the fronts and 30 psi in the rears, and I rarely deviate from those figures, but I certainly wouldn't want to be putting 16, 18 or 20 psi in them because the manual of the day might say so. I think actually these bikes I'm referring to are a little bit more modern than your Panthers and your pre-unit Triumphs and the original Redditch Royal Enfield Bullets, and I'm sure that their manuals, probably mostly from the 70s, would probably state higher tyre pressures than that anyway. But it's worth keeping in mind that in certain circumstances it's probably best not to necessarily believe everything that the manual says these days, especially where things like tyres are concerned, and obviously perhaps grades of oil as well. You know, things do change, and you know, you've got more choice, more multi-grade oils now than monogrades, but that's another subject for another day. Tyres and their pressures, I would really only be happy on any of the bikes I've got if I were to check the tyre pressures and not have access to a pump or an airline or something. If I saw any less than 20 psi in any of those tyres, I wouldn't really be comfortable. I'd be going very slowly and looking for somewhere to get some air in. If I had, say, 22 psi in the front tyre of the Trident, I would be riding it very carefully. I wouldn't be happy until I knew I had 26 or more in the front of that one. And getting back to the tyres, the old tyres and the current equivalents, the K70 is a good example because you can get exactly the same tyre supposedly now as you could 50 years ago, maybe even 60 years ago. Same sizes, same tread pattern, same make on the sidewalls, Dunlop K70, great. And I do like those tyres, and they're a good sort of multi-purpose universal tyre actually. But the original ones, like I say, were 2 or 3 times as heavy as what you get now, and the sidewalls were thicker. But I wouldn't necessarily say that that meant those tyres were stronger. I'm sure that's not the case, and probably the modern equivalents can be lighter with thinner sidewalls because of the materials inside of the rubber are probably perhaps Kevlar instead of cotton or whatever, but they're probably a much more modern and robust material, thickness for thickness and weight for weight and so on, and that's why the tyre is much lighter. But because of that, they're also more squashy and pliable, so you need to have a bit more air in them. And I certainly wouldn't want to be going around on a new pair of K70s with about 18 psi in them, because I think you might end up with a bit of a disaster on your hands. But all this is really just my own opinion, and you know, I was asked for it by a few people, and I just want to emphasize, I'm not trying to tell anybody what to do, I'm just sort of sharing what I do, and if that helps anybody to any degree, great. But if you've got any doubts at all, and your bike is an oldish bike and perhaps the pressures that the manual gives, the original manual gives, are rather low looking, I would certainly start doing a bit of googling and checking up on the make of tyre you've got and the application it's for, and trying to get some information on what a current up-to-date pressure would be, because it'll probably be quite a lot different to what it might have been back in the day. So please make sure you know what you're doing with the tyre pressures, make up your own mind about well, not how much air you want to put in, make sure you know how much you need to have in there, and try not to deviate too much from that. I know there's people that say, oh, I put 35 psi in my rear tyre and the cornering's vastly improved, and you'll get someone else saying, oh well, I run about 21 in mine and it's great. So there's always going to be that difference of opinion, but my bike's 28 in the front, 30 in the rear, possibly slightly less in the likes of the Trials Cub replica here. When I'm going off-road, I'll probably have something like 24 in the front and 22 in the rear, but that's an exception rather than the rule with my machines. Anyway, I hope perhaps this has been of some interest and might be of some use to some people, but please make sure that your tyre pressures are correct or safe, and ride safe and enjoy your ride. Thanks for watching.